Hello and welcome back to Maximum Attack Rallying. Welcome to part 3, the third and final part of this long saga about my old Escort RS2000 rally car. I hope you've enjoyed this series up to now. This is the final episode because we're reaching the conclusion of this long tale. If you haven't watched the first 2 episodes, please do go and do that. That will give you the full backstory of the car. So episode 1 covers kind of the history of the car before I owned it and how I came to own it and how it evolved prior to me taking ownership of it. Episode 2 covers kind of the rebuild as it was, which was a long and troublesome job, and there's a few technical details in there, so if you're interested in Escort rally cars or modified Escorts, do give that a watch. You might find some helpful hints and tips in there. This episode, however, is not just about the car as much as it is about my first rally. So my first event was in February 2019. It was at Snetterton. It was the Motorsport News Circuit Rally Championship, as it was at the time. That championship is still going now. I actually did the same rally earlier this year, albeit in a hired Impreza. So that was my first ever event. It was a long time after I had hoped it would be. I thought I would buy the car and get out very quickly, but it didn't turn out that way. So we had basically a 6-year gap while I was messing around with the car and getting a bit out of control and doing things to it that I probably shouldn't have done. So I think we should just get right into it and found out how we ended up going from a short project, or what should have been a short project, into my first rally. So as you will know from episode 2, the car had undergone a hugely overcomplicated rebuild process. I changed all of the bodywork visually, I changed all of the interior visually, changed all the wiring, new gearbox, new clutch, new drive shafts, new brakes, new pedals. It was a big change, and the car was completely untested. As is so often the way, we make plans, don't we? I put an entry in for the rally, I think it was in November, the rally was in February the next year. So I put in my entry thinking, I've got plenty of time, just wrap up the last couple of jobs, you know, having the event in the diary, that'll make me finish it. And I mean, anyway, we all know how that goes, don't we? So I thought I'd have loads of time. In the days leading up to the event, it was absolute chaos, complete madness. So I had actually intended to take the car over to my local scrutineer in the run-up to the event so he could just give it a look over, make sure everything was fine. And I went to take the car to him, and that morning I thought, I'll just make sure that the wheel nuts are tight. Famous last words. So I snapped a stud, so I couldn't take the car to him. So that was a bit of a problem, and it kind of showed how that week was going to go. So I had to change that out. I had some problems with the new upright, so it took a long time to do that. I think I had the old upright off within 10 or 15 minutes, but getting the new upright on was really problematic. There was a problem with drive shaft fitment. So that was that week really. Had a van borrowed that my co-driver had borrowed from his work, had to hire a trailer, was rushing around getting tyres put on rims, painting wheels. The car used ST170 Focus wheels, I didn't mention that in the last video, which I bought because at the time they were really cheap, and I managed to get 10 or 15 of them for next to nothing. So they were an easy choice, but they were all silver and I wanted the black, so I was rushing around painting them black and messing around, and it was basically a disaster. All of that was compounded by the, not compounded, it came to a head. Let's say it came to a head. So the night before the rally, I took the car out to bed in the brakes, and I was going through the brake bedding procedure, and I could feel the brake pedal getting softer and softer and softer. And I knew there was a problem. Took the car home, had to put it straight on the trailer because it was late, and discovered that there was a little bit of a brake fluid weep from one of the calipers on the front of the car, one of the Brembo 4-pots. Nipped up the unions and just had to go for it. Got to the event the next day, and that was that. We were ready to start our first rally, and that was an emotional moment for me. I want to stop and pause and just take you through that. It was a huge moment. I've been a rally fan for a long time, and after everything, you know, after this drawn-out, convoluted build, to actually get to the start of my first event, to pull up to the start line on the first event was such an incredible feeling. And you know, it meant a huge amount. I had Dan, my best friend, in the car, who's in the picture there behind me, and he was also there as well in the Impreza. It was such a huge moment, so I was really, really grateful at that point. And that should have been it, shouldn't it? It was like, let's go, let's do the rally, have fun. And I mean, So we pulled off the start line on the first stage, and immediately there was a problem. The clutch was slipping. I knew it the second we pulled away. The clutch was slipping, and didn't know what the problem was, obviously. And we carried on as best we could. Still had a soft brake pedal, and I mean, we weren't pushing, obviously, because it was my first ever event. I mean, I'd done lots of track days and things, but we carried on as much as we could, and we got to Agostini, is on the infield of Snetterton, and the car lost drive. The clutch just stopped working, so we coasted onto the grass. And you'd think in that moment, you know, it would be really easy to be angry, wouldn't it? But to be honest, I laughed. I think in that moment, all of the pressure and all of the expectation just disappeared, because it was just fucked, to be brutally honest. You know, the job was fucked. So that was it. You know, we stood there for a while. We had to wait for the second stage to be recovered, and we just stood and chatted and watched the other cars, and it was a weird moment. I think, you know, if you'd asked me what would have happened before the event, I would have said that I'd been really mad, but I wasn't. It took all the pressure away. So that was that. Anyway, we got the car back to service, and my friend Matt was there, and he was amazing. You know, he came down and serviced for the day, and he just got to work on the car immediately. Obviously, we'd missed the second stage already, but he did eventually manage to find what the problem was, and basically, as I said in part 2, the car had a Group A type pedal box, and the actuator rod for the clutch master cylinder had worked its way a bit loose. So basically it was just applying pressure to the clutch the whole time, so it wasn't allowing it to fully release the clutch as it was, so you had drive, so it was just slipping. He fixed that, and after that the car, the drivetrain, the untested gearbox was faultless. It was brilliant. As I said in the previous video when I was talking about that was mechanically was the best thing I did to the car. It absolutely transformed the way it drove. Gear shift was amazing, shorter gears. It was such a good modification. Really, really like that. And I'm kind of pleased, a little bit proud of myself, because I think I'm the only person to have ever done it in an Escort, fitted that kind of gearbox and gear kit combination. So that was pretty good. What wasn't so good was the brakes, unfortunately. So the problem that I'd had the previous day with this fluid leak had not gone away, unfortunately, because the front brakes use banjo bolts with copper washers. The mating surface for those on the caliper itself was pitted, and obviously there was nothing that we could do about that. So we couldn't, you know, we did the unions up as tight as we dare and just had to live with it. It was okay. The car stopped, but the brake pedal was super long, and I just couldn't get any confidence in the brakes. So that meant, you know, I was putting the brakes on way too early a lot of the time, and I couldn't build any kind of rhythm somehow. But you know, we tried our best. The rest of the car was absolutely perfect. So we did. After the clutch had been fixed, I think it ended up being like stage 4 of 8 or something. I can't remember how many stages there were now, but we did. I think we ended up doing 3 or 4 stages in a row, and they were absolutely fine apart from the brakes. And we did start to build a little bit of a rhythm, and I started to push as much as I could in areas, you know, where I wasn't worrying about slowing down, and it felt pretty good. And we got to stage, I think it was stage 7 of 8, and unfortunately, because we were starting to push on a bit, the oil pressure light came on because the car had a standard sump. So obviously the oil was moving around a little bit, and with the car on slicks, it just couldn't cope with it. So we ended up just retiring and not bothering to do the last stage, rather than risking any damage to the engine. The engine was fine, it was running okay, but we just thought, you know what, we're not going to get a result anyway, so let's just draw a line under it. And it was a shame in a way that we had all the problems, but you know, I'm not the only person in the world who's done a rally and suffered problems. And as I said, the car was completely untested. I'd driven it on the road a tiny amount before the event, and hadn't really had a chance to test it properly. I'd hoped to do a track day in the weeks before the event, but it just didn't pan out with some last minute jobs that had to be done. So that was that, really. You know, that it was a shame. It was not the result we wanted. I would have loved to have had a trouble-free day, but you know, that's rallying, as they say. You know, we did okay with what we had. We were getting quicker. You know, we were still off the pace, but I think that car had potential. You know, with if the brakes had been working, I think we could have been a bit, you know, could have been a good bit closer. But that was that, really. So that was February 2019. Did my first rally, and that was a huge moment, as I said. Afterwards, however, I think things took a bit of a surprising turn. There had been a plan in place, not really a plan as such. I don't think I'd had time for plans because everything was kind of leading up to that moment. But in the aftermath of the event, you know, I'd always known that the idea was to keep developing the car. You know, I said before that I left the engine alone, but the idea was that I would keep developing and then I would start to look at the engine. And after the event, I was reasonably happy with how the car had performed, apart from the brake issue. And I looked at doing a baffled sump in the engine to kind of get things kind of moving. Obviously, I fixed the brakes, so that was one of the first things I did. I took the calipers off. I actually had the mating faces for these washers skimmed, but the calipers themselves were porous. There was lots of you know, imperfections in the material, pockets of air, so I ended up buying another set of calipers and replacing them, and after that the car was fine. But the plan at that point that started to develop in my mind was, okay, let's look at kind of Evo version of the car. What can we do to improve it? So there was two aspects to that, I suppose. The first was weight reduction. I'd weighed the car when it was finished, only on a weigh bridge, so it wasn't very accurate, and it was over 1,000 kilos still. And I wanted to get it down to 1,000 kilos. So part of the plan for that was to change a few parts. So I wanted to change the bonnet, which was steel, to fiberglass. The front wings were already fiberglass. I'd hacked the bumpers about, you know, all of the foam padding and everything from behind the bumpers was already gone. I thought change the tailgate for a fiberglass one. They were probably the two big hitters in terms of weight. Then look at changing the fuel tank guard because it had an aluminium fuel tank guard, so I was going to go to fiberglass. It had glass in the front doors still, so I was going to go back to plastic. Just things like that. Try and get as much weight out of the car as possible. The other thing was, of course, the engine. So I had initially thought that I would modify the original engine with cams, throttle bodies, and try and get it a bit nearer to 200 horsepower. So the RS2000 is 150 horsepower as standard. So I wanted to get it nearer to 200. So with cams, throttle bodies, headwork, I should have been able to get towards that. Then I had the bright idea that I would fit a Duratec engine. And the reason that I started to look at that is because, firstly, RS2000s are old and getting parts for the engine is becoming problematic. Well, it was becoming problematic 5 years ago when I was doing this, so I dread to think what it's like now. You know, finding seals and gaskets and timing chain parts was getting more difficult. So I thought, well, maybe we should look at something more modern. I could have gone to a Z-Tech, but I didn't really fancy that. And the idea of a Duratec came to my mind. Another guy with an RS2000, I was doing it at the time, and it seemed to tick a lot of boxes. So firstly, common engine, loads of bits around for it. Secondly, it's a bit more tunable than the RS2000 engine, so with my cams and throttle bodies, I would have definitely got to 200 horsepower. So it would have achieved that target. But crucially as well, it also would have saved weight. So the Duratec is an aluminium block, whereas the RS2000 is an iron block. It's quite a heavy engine. It's a durable engine, but it's quite a heavy engine. So it would have also helped me with this getting under 1,000 kilos idea. So that was the plan. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And there's a reason for that. And that reason was a mental one. I think by that point, I was just kind of done. I think with everything over the last few years, building the car, spending so many weekends on it, all this time and energy and money, all of the stress of doing the rally. After the rally, I didn't touch the car for a few weeks. I just had a bit of a break from it. Over that summer, I took it to a few shows and events and things, didn't compete in it. And I just thought, do you know what? I'm done. I felt like I had kind of reached the end of the road with the car for me. I think I had ideas, obviously, of taking it further, but I just don't think my heart was in it. So at that point, I decided, having spent far too much money and time, that I was ready to sell it. So at that point, it was summer 2019, I put the car up for sale. I think it was around August. And that should be where our story ends, shouldn't it? So I put the car on eBay. I thought it might take a while to sell, to be honest, but it actually sold really, really quickly. Someone contacted me from Southwest Wales, asked a few questions. We had a bit of a chat, and he paid for it over the phone, having never seen it. Sent someone with a truck to come and pick it up, and that was that. Done deal. It sold within 2 or 3 weeks, I think, which for a rally car is very impressive, because you see a lot of rally cars for sale and they stay for sale for ages. Maybe I sold it too cheaply, but there we go. I think, given what happened in the world in 2020, perhaps selling it in 2019 wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to me. So, as I said, that should be where this story comes to a close, but as it turns out, it's not. So while I don't own the car anymore, the chap that I sold it to, Joe, has kept in touch a little bit. We don't speak regularly, but now to begin with, he sent me a couple of questions because he decided to make a few changes. And he actually contacted me a few months ago with some updates. So the car has lived on, which I'm really, really pleased about. It's actually gone down a very different path though. So while I built the car for stage rallying, and it had always been a stage rally car, Joe actually bought it to use it for road rallying. So he had to make some modifications for that. So since I owned it, it's regained some of the interior to make it eligible for road and Targa rallies. He's also had to go back to standard headlights, standard front wings instead of the wider wings. He dropped it back down to 15-inch wheels and fitted smaller brakes. I think he actually changed the final drive as well. So he went to an even lower final drive to get the gearing down even further for road rallies. But most importantly of all, he did change the engine. So as I said, standard engine when I had the car, but Joe, he decided to actually modify the factory engine. So because it was being used for road rallying, he couldn't go down the throttle body route because that's not allowed in road rallies. So he ended up doing forged pistons, steel connecting rods and camshafts and things like that. So as it turns out, the car has ended up with a much more serious engine than it had when I had it. And I kind of like that in a way, because a Group A RS2000 didn't have throttle bodies. It also had to use standard intake and exhaust system, which is exactly what Joe's had to do for road rallying. So it's when I had it, part of the aim was always to try and take some inspiration from a Group A car. It had Group A top mounts, it had the Group A headlights. I fitted the jacking points and things from a Group A car, just to try and I wasn't trying to create a replica as such, but I wanted to take some of the kind of sensible, smart ideas for making the car more usable and things that they'd had, and apply them to my car to make it better. So I kind of like the fact that it's ended up with an engine that kind of echoes that Group A era as well. And so I'm just really pleased that it's still getting used. I'm pleased that he sends me pictures and videos of it being used, and it's just nice that after all these years, it's been a rally car for getting on for 25 years now, and it's still going. It's still being used, still being enjoyed, and I really like that. I think at the time that I sold the car, or just after the rally, I developed a bit of negative feelings about it. It had become a bit of a burden in terms of time and finances. So I think it's kind of nice now to look back on it in that more positive light. And I do, for all of the negatives, I do look back at pictures of it and think, oh, I do actually quite miss that car a bit. I wouldn't have it back. I don't think I'd have it back. I think if I was to have another Escort rally car, I'd probably start again. Going back to what I said in, I think it was the first or the second episode. People always say that you should buy a rally car and use it. And I think that is sound advice in many ways. But for me, as someone so fussy, I think if I was to do it again, I would build it myself and start from a foundation where I wasn't trying to redo things that people had done before. It was just a standard car. I fitted the roll cage that I wanted. I fitted the suspension that I wanted, the gearbox that I wanted. And I think for me, that's a big part of the enjoyment, is kind of creating something that's my own. And I think it can actually be easier to do that when you start with a standard car, especially when it's not a car that's been a rally car for a long time and has been chopped and changed and messed with. So I think that's about it, isn't it? I think it's it was definitely an adventure. Would I recommend it? Maybe not. But yeah, I think it taught me a lot. It taught me a huge amount about building cars, and as I said in another video, I think it was the last episode, I had to learn to weld, and I learned so many skills from doing that that I wouldn't have learned if I'd bought the car and just used it straight away. So I have to be grateful for that. It was definitely an adventure. It did allow me to do my first rally, so I'm very, very grateful for that. And while I'm sad that that car is sad in some ways, at least, that car is no longer in my life, I do still have an Escort rally car in the shape of the Formula 2 car that I showed you in part 1. That is some way off being done, but hopefully we'll get there, and that is obviously a much more serious machine. It's X-Works. You know, it's a proper Gordon Spooner body shell, mount tune engine. There's lots missing, but you know, a lot of the fundamental stuff is there. So one day, hopefully, that will come together, and you know, hopefully, I'll get to build something else as well. I think I would like to put the Escort back together for sure, because obviously having an F2 car is amazing, and to have it in a running condition would be even more amazing. But I definitely have it in mind to build another rally car myself. So hopefully that will be a future build series. Not quite yet, but hopefully we'll get there. In the meantime though, there is definitely more car videos to come. I said in part 1 about my other cars, so the Peugeot and the Renault. They are not obviously projects on the same scale, but there will hopefully be some little things going on with those that I can make some more videos about. The Clio needs some work, as I said, so I think we'll do some videos as we get that back on the road. I don't know whether I'll keep it long term, but it needs a few jobs doing to it to at least get it MOT worthy, or Saudi version of the MOT worthy. And then I will decide if I'm going to keep it or sell it or change it for something else, because I would like to have a car that I can mess around with. And even the Peugeot, I've got some ideas for the Peugeot. It's new, but there's some things we could do there. So let's wrap this one up there. I do appreciate you watching. I know there's lots and lots to take in these videos. They have ended up being rather long, but I do very much appreciate you watching. And if you have enjoyed, do please like, comment and subscribe, and stay tuned, turn on notifications and all that other stuff. And you can follow me over on Instagram, where I do lots of things as well. And hopefully I will see you again in my next video.